My name is Riley Carter. I'm 28 years old. And last Thanksgiving, my mom stood up in the middle of a luxury ski resort in Aspen, raised her champagne glass, and turned my whole life into a punchline. I have 2 daughters, she announced, smiling at the room full of strangers and extended family. One is a famous lawyer. And the other? Well, the other is basically a beggar. The table exploded with laughter. Chairs creaked, glasses clinked. Someone actually snorted. I felt every eye slide over me, down my thrift store sweater, to the worn sneakers I'd thrown on after a 12-hour shift. Remember when she said she'd be some kind of star athlete? Someone joked. Be nice, another voice chimed in. At least she knows how to sleep on the couch. You're lucky we haven't kicked you out yet. That was my own father, adding to the pile like it was the funniest thing he'd said all year. My nephew muttered something about wanting to crawl into the floor if he were me. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just wrapped my fingers around my grandmother's necklace, felt the cool metal against my skin, pushed my chair back, and walked out of that perfect postcard dining room without a word. Nobody followed. Nobody even called my name. 1 week later, my phone lit up at 6:03 a.m. Mom's card just got declined. 8:06 a.m. Why are our investments crashing? Why didn't the funds go through? 10:30 a.m. The bank says our accounts are under review. 11:30 a.m. Please don't do this. We know we were wrong. Where are you? If you want to know what happened in that 1 week between their laughter and their panic, stay with me until the end. Because it turns out, the beggar they laughed at was the only reason they were rich. Pause. Let me back up. To understand why I walked out of that resort, you have to understand the role I played in the Carter family. I grew up in a house where my sister Natalie's trophies lived in their own glass cabinet with internal lighting, and my soccer medals got tossed in a shoebox in the garage. Natalie was the golden child. Straight as law school plan since age 10, the framed newspaper article on the fridge. She was the famous lawyer before she even passed the bar. My brother Luke. He was the natural leader. The one Dad took to Home Depot and business seminars. The one who was going to run something big one day. Me. I was the creative one. In my family, creative is a polite code word for unstable. I was the kid who drew logos in the margins of my homework and begged for a cheap laptop so I could teach myself design and coding from YouTube. Every time I mentioned building an app or a website, my parents would smile that tight, pitying smile and say things like, "That's cute, Riley," or "Maybe keep a real job just in case." When I blew my knee out in high school and my shot at a college soccer scholarship disappeared, the way they talk about it now, you'd think it was just another example of me quitting. They forget the surgery. The rehab. The nights I cried because my whole identity had shifted in a single bad landing. Over time, the comments got sharper. At family dinners, Mom would say, "If you worked half as hard as Natalie, you'd be fine by now." Dad would shake his head and tell guests, "Riley is still trying to figure herself out." Like I wasn't sitting right there. Luke would joke about how many side hustles I'd tried. Delivering groceries, walking dogs, freelance design. "She's allergic to stability," he'd say. Natalie would stay quiet. But in my family, silence is just a different way of agreeing. So when they laughed at me in Aspen, it wasn't new. It was just louder. It was public. And it was the moment I finally realized that, in their version of our family story, I was never going to be anything but the failure they pointed at to make themselves feel better. Sound of a car engine starting, driving on a highway. After I left the resort, I drove through the mountains in silence. My grandma was the only person who ever really saw me. She used to tell me, "You don't have to be the golden child to shine. You just have to stop standing where they cast their shadows." I didn't fully understand that until that night. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise in my tiny apartment in Denver. I pulled on a hoodie and went out for a run in the cold air. The sky was still almost black, streetlights buzzing. My breath turned white as I ran. With every step, I replayed their words. Not just from Aspen, but from years of being the punchline. The jokes about me being broke. The digs about, Maybe next year you'll finally make some real money. The little comments that sound harmless if you only hear one, but start to crush you when you've heard them for a decade. I thought about how many times I had swallowed it. Told myself it was just family. That they didn't mean it. That I should be grateful they let me crash on their couch in LA for a while when I was getting started. Grateful. For being treated like a stray dog they let inside when the weather was bad. Somewhere between mile 2 and mile 3, something snapped into place. Not anger exactly. It felt more like a switch flipping from "please love me" to "you don't get to talk about me like that anymore." I stopped on the sidewalk, hands on my knees, heart pounding. And I knew 2 things with total clarity. 1. I was done auditioning for a role in their perfect little success story. 2. I had been the one quietly keeping their lives from falling apart for years, and they had no idea. Sound of typing on a keyboard. They had no idea about the nights I stayed up reworking payment schedules so their loans wouldn't default. They had no idea whose money was actually plugging the holes in their finances. They sat there in Aspen, calling me a beggar, while living off safety nets I had built behind the scenes. I straightened up, thumb brushing over my necklace, and made a decision. I wasn't going to scream at them. I wasn't going to show up at their door with bank statements. I was simply going to stop. Stop fixing. Stop funding. Stop being the invisible support beam in a house where I was treated like clutter. Let the numbers tell the truth they refused to hear from my mouth. Let them feel what life really looked like without the beggar they laughed at. Most people in my family think I deliver food and design pretty buttons for random apps when I can't sleep. That's the version of my life they're comfortable with because it fits their story about me being the messy, unstable one. The real version started 6 years ago, in a cramped co-working space in downtown Denver. I was 22, fresh off a failed attempt to launch a fitness tracking app, sitting across from a guy named Noah Park. Noah believed in my brain more than my own parents ever had. Noah was the one who looked at my spaghetti-covered whiteboard of ideas and said, "You know freelancers are terrible with money, right? What if you build something that thinks about it for them?" That was how LoopNest was born. It's an app that tracks income from different clients, predicts your tax, automates bill payments, and lets you set up rules like, if my account drops below this number, pause extra payments. I handled design and user flows. Coded late at night. Fixed bugs until my eyes burned. Noah handled growth, partnerships, and calling scary financial people so I didn't have to. First we had like 10 users. Friends of friends. Photographer. 2 Etsy shop owners. 1 guy who edited wedding videos. I still delivered groceries in the evenings. I still took odd graphic design gigs. And I still heard my dad say, "Are you ever going to get a job with a 401k? But LoopNest grew. Slowly then. Not slowly. A YouTuber mentioned us. A small business newsletter featured us. More people signed up. We added features, hired a tiny team, brought in an accountant. A local fintech blog wrote about the app built by a Denver girl in a hoodie. My mom never read that article. She doesn't follow that kind of thing. Somewhere in the middle of all of this, my family started having little emergencies. Luke's boutique gym in Dallas got hit by a burst pipe one winter, flooding the front studio. Insurance covered some of it, but not all, and he had a balloon payment on a loan coming up. He called me one night, half drunk, complaining that small businesses were impossible and he might have to close the whole thing. Natalie, the star lawyer in Los Angeles, had taken on a huge civil rights case that ate up her time and money. She racked up legal costs on her own card before the firm reimbursed her. Had a nanny to pay, rent on a very nice apartment. Student loans still gnawing at her every month. My parents, Linda and George, were quietly drowning in their mortgage and medical bills, pretending everything was fine. Even when Mom started cutting coupons again and Dad pretended he liked staying home more because gas was expensive. Aunt Brenda's catering business was just starting to recover from the pandemic, barely staying afloat after events were cancelled for almost a year. To the rest of the world they were all doing great. To me, with access to the numbers they shared in late-night phone calls, they were held together by duct tape and denial. That's where LoopNest came in. One night, staring at all the features we'd built for strangers, I added new rules for my own accounts. Extra income from my biggest contracts. It didn't go to clothes or vacations. It went to a folder inside LoopNest called Family Safety Net. That folder split into 4 sub-accounts. Luke's gym debt, Natalie's credit and nanny costs, my parents' mortgage and utilities, Aunt Brenda's business loan. Using the same tools my users had, I created automated payments from my personal account straight to whatever bills were screaming the loudest. I didn't tell anyone, not because I was some kind of martyr, but because I knew exactly how it would go if I did. They would politely thank me at first. Then they would expect it. Then they would rewrite the story in their heads so that my help became a background detail and their hard work stayed front and center. So instead I let the app do the talking. I set a rule to cover shortfalls in Luke's gym lease if his revenue dipped below a certain line. I paid down part of Natalie's high-interest card every month so her balance stopped climbing. I made sure my parents' mortgage never hit more than 30 days late, pushing payments through right before penalties kicked in. I sent small but steady amounts toward Aunt Brenda's loan so the bank would back off. Over 5 years, those little emergency boosts added up. About $360,000 worth of little money I could have used to buy a house, to travel, to give myself the stability my parents never thought I could create. I tracked every cent in LoopNest. Every time I watched a red bar turn yellow or green because of my transfers, I felt this twisted mixture of pride and shame. Pride because I had built something powerful enough to actually change people's lives. Shame because I was using that power on people who still called me a failure in public. When Mom stood in Aspen and called me, basically a beggar, she did it in a jacket she'd bought on a credit card that hadn't been sent to collections yet because of a payment I had scheduled behind the scenes. When Luke went back to bragging about bouncing back after a flood, his rebound was literally paid for by the girl he said was allergic to stability. When Natalie ordered another glass of wine without thinking about it, it was on a card whose interest I had been quietly killing for months. Standing in my apartment after that trip, I opened my laptop, logged into LoopNest, pulled up the Family Safety Net dashboard. For columns, for names, a total that made my stomach twist. My finger hovered over the rules I'd written. Auto transfer every Friday. Cover late fees automatically. Round up spare income and apply to their balances. My chest hurt. Not from anger this time, but from this bone-deep exhaustion. I had been their invisible safety net for years, and in return they still saw me as a joke. I thought about my grandma's voice, about stepping out of their shadows. Then very calmly I started turning things off. One by one I disabled the rules. I cancelled future transfers. I reset my own thresholds so extra money would finally stay in my account instead of bleeding into theirs. I didn't delete any records. I didn't touch their logins. I didn't hack anything. I just removed myself from the equation. LoopNest pinged a quiet confirmation sound each time I hit save. To anyone else it would have been nothing. To me it was the loudest click I'd ever heard. It was the sound of a rope being cut. Somewhere down the line bills would come due. And for the first time in years, I wouldn't be there to silently pay them. They wanted to call me a beggar. Fine. Let's see how their perfect lives hold up without the beggar's money propping them up. Sound of a phone vibration repeated. The first alert came the very next week. Early on a Thursday morning, when the sky over Denver was still that gray-blue color that makes you feel like the day hasn't decided to start yet. My phone buzzed on the nightstand at 6:03 a.m. I almost ignored it, assuming it was one of my clients in another time zone. But the preview on the lock screen made my stomach tighten. My card just got declined at Starbucks. Is there something wrong with the bank? I stared at the message for a long time. 4 years, every time her balance dipped too low, LoopNest would quietly send enough to cover the gap before the decline ever happened. Now, with those rules gone, reality was finally catching up. I put the phone face down and went to brush my teeth. By 7:15 a.m., there were 3 more messages and a missed call. Mom was spiraling. The app keeps saying insufficient funds. We just got a notice about the mortgage being late again. I thought this was all on autopay. My chest pinched a little at that word. Autopay. As if the universe itself had been taking care of them. Not their youngest daughter sitting in a cramped office at midnight moving sliders back and forth to make sure their lives stayed in the green. At 8:06 a.m., Dad's name flashed on my screen. I let it ring out the first time. The second time I picked up and held the phone to my ear without saying anything. Riley. His voice snapped, breathless. Like he'd just come in from outside. Do you have any idea what's going on with the investments? The account is saying our funds transfer didn't go through this month. The guy from the bank said we're in some kind of review. What did you do? I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the wall. There it was. The assumption that if something was wrong I had broken it. Not the years of them borrowing against the future. Refinancing. Taking on more than they could realistically pay back. Me. I didn't do anything, I said evenly. Did you pay your bills with your own money? There was a quiet beat on the line. I could almost hear his brain trying to spin that sentence into something he could understand without admitting what it really meant. Don't be smart with me, he shot back. We've never had problems like this before. All of a sudden the mortgage is flagged, the credit card payment bounced. The retirement account is frozen for risk assessment. That doesn't just happen out of nowhere. I remembered clicking those disable rule buttons, one after another, until the family safety net dashboard went still. It didn't happen out of nowhere. It happened from right here, in my apartment, with my own hand. Maybe you should ask your bank, I said. You're the one who's always in control, remember? Before he could answer, I hung up. My hands were shaking, but underneath the tremor was something sharper. Relief. For the first time, the weight around my neck wasn't the necklace. It was the debt I had never signed up for. By 10:30 a.m., my phone was a small storm of notifications. A screenshot from Natalie of a bank email. Subject line, account under review. Her text underneath. My accounts are being temporarily frozen until I clear an outstanding balance. This is insane. I had everything scheduled. Did you mess with anything when you stayed here last? There was another message right after it. If this is some kind of punishment for the other night, this isn't funny. I have court this week. I can't have my cards bouncing. For a few seconds, anger bubbled so hot it felt like static in my ears. Punishment. Funny. As if I had hacked into her life just to inconvenience her week. Instead of spending 5 years quietly steering her away from financial disaster. As if she hadn't sat in Aspen and let Mom label me a beggar while she watched from her pedestal. I typed out 3 responses and deleted all of them. Finally, I settled on nothing at all. Silence felt more accurate than any paragraph I could send. At 11:30 a.m., a voicemail came in from Mom. Her voice was nothing like the bright, performative hostess at the resort. It was smaller, cracked at the edges. Riley, honey, please call me back. The mortgage company called again. They said if we don't make a full payment this week, they'll start the foreclosure process. Your father's retirement account is locked until we settle some past due amount. Natalie says her cards are being reviewed. Luke is saying something about the gym lease. I don't understand what's happening. Please don't do this. Whatever this is. We know we were wrong at dinner, okay? We were just joking. Please. Where are you? I listened to it twice. Once with my heart. Once with my head. My heart heard my mom, scared and confused, realizing maybe for the first time that the ground under her feet was not as solid as she thought. My head heard years of minimized apologies. Of we were just joking. Of me being asked to swallow hurt so things could go back to normal. Normal meant I paid the price so they didn't have to. I replayed Aspen in my mind. The champagne. Laughter. My dad's voice saying I was lucky they hadn't kicked me out. Lucky. I thought about every bill I'd paid while they rolled their eyes at my gig jobs. Every time I'd chosen their stability over mine. I pressed my thumb against the back of my phone, feeling the heat of the screen. Then I hit record and kept my voice calm. Who are you? Said. Do I know you? Why should I help? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I just sent the message and set the phone down next to my keyboard. My hands were steady now. Outside, the sun was finally up, catching on the snow still clinging to the edges of the sidewalks. I grabbed my running shoes and my grandmother's necklace, looping the chain around my fingers as I laced up. On the trail, my footsteps thudded in time with a thought I couldn't shake. For years they had treated my life like a joke, and my exhaustion like laziness. Now the joke had stopped paying their bills. Actions have consequences. For the first time, those consequences weren't landing on me. I thought the messages would slow down after that. But they didn't. They multiplied. By Friday afternoon, my phone looked like a fire alarm. Missed calls from Mom, Dad, Natalie, even Luke, which almost never happens unless he wants something. I muted the family group chat after Mom sent a long paragraph about misunderstandings, and we didn't mean it like that. And then immediately followed it with, also, do you know why the electric bill bounced this month? The company said the account used to be in good standing. Used to be. That phrase hit me harder than I expected. On Saturday, I was in the parking lot of a grocery store, dropping off an order, when my phone buzzed with a notification from the building's front camera. Mom and Dad were standing outside my apartment door, bundled in coats. My dad knocking like he had every right to be there. My mom glancing around the hallway like someone might see her and ask what went wrong. They had flown in from Sacramento without telling me. For a second, watching them on my screen, the old guilt tugged at me. That little voice that says, "They're your parents. Let them in. Fix it." Then I remembered Mom standing in front of a room of people calling me a beggar with a smile. I remembered Dad saying I was lucky they hadn't kicked me out. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and drove to my next delivery. Later I played the audio from the intercom. "She's not answering," Mom whispered. "What if something happened to her?" "Nothing happened to her," Dad muttered. "She's just being dramatic. She probably did something with the accounts and now she's hiding." The idea that I was some reckless hacker breaking things for attention. It would have been funny if it weren't coming from the same man whose mortgage I'd been saving for years. That night, I was at my usual coffee shop, headphones on, working through a client's onboarding flow, when someone knocked on my table. I looked up and saw Natalie and my dad standing there, too sharply dressed for the mismatched chairs and chipped mugs around us. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told them where I worked. Mom must have dug through old emails, found an invoice, tracked the address. Course she had. "Can we sit?" Natalie asked. She didn't wait for an answer. They both slid into the chairs across from me like this was a scheduled meeting. "You look busy," my dad said, glancing at my open laptop. The LoopNest dashboard was up, but I quickly tabbed to a generic wireframe. "Freelance stuff," I said. "You know, the unstable life of a beggar." Natalie flinched a little at that. Her eyes dropped for half a second before she straightened her spine again. "We need to talk about what's happening," she said. "The timing is suspicious." I took a sip of my now cold coffee. "What timing?" Dad leaned forward. "Your mother's card being declined. The foreclosure warning. The sudden issues with my retirement account. Natalie's accounts being frozen. Brenda just called and said her business line of credit is under review too. It all started right after you stormed out in Aspen. That is one hell of a coincidence." There it was again. The assumption that my anger was the problem, not their entire way of treating me. "You think I'm sitting here in Denver hacking every bank in America?" Yes. "I barely get my own groceries delivered on time." Natalie exhaled sharply. "No one said hacking. But you've always been good with tech. You're the only one who understands all those payment apps. You stayed with me in LA. You helped me set up some stuff. Maybe you changed something you shouldn't have. Maybe you're angry and you're using whatever access you have to teach us a lesson." Her tone tried to sound legal, objective. But underneath it I heard something new. Fear. She wasn't used to being on the side of the table where she didn't have all the information. "I don't have access to your accounts," I said. "I never did. If your life is spinning because a few automatic transfers stopped, maybe the issue isn't me. Maybe it's that you've been living on money you never knew was there." Dad frowned. What does that mean? I looked at him. Really looked at him. The lines in his forehead were deeper. His eyes more tired than I remembered. For a second I almost softened. Then I thought about how easily he had humiliated me in front of everyone. How quickly he defaulted to believing I was the one who broke something. It means you should probably call your financial institutions, I said. Ask them who's been making sure your lights stay on. Dad slammed his palm lightly on the table, enough to rattle my cup. You don't get to talk in riddles, Riley. We are your family. I felt the necklace under my shirt, the small pendant resting against my skin. Family. The word that had been used to excuse every dig, every joke at my expense. Every time they brushed off my hurt because, we're just teasing. That's what families do. I packed my laptop slowly, slid it into my backpack and stood up. I have a meeting, I said. If you really want answers, you're not going to get them by ambushing me in coffee shops and accusing me of crimes. Then how? Natalie demanded. Her voice cracked on the last word. It was the closest thing to vulnerability I had heard from her in years. Pause. Thinking. For once I had leverage. Not the kind you wave around to hurt people, but the kind that forces them to finally see you. To listen. Thursday, I said. 7 p.m. This same place. Bring Mom. Bring Luke. Bring whoever else thinks I ruined their life. If you want to understand what's going on, everyone needs to be in the same room. And you need to actually shut up long enough to hear me. Dad narrowed his eyes. Why Thursday? Because I said so, I replied. You've been running my life on your schedule for 28 years. You can clear one evening for me. For once, neither of them had a quick comeback. Natalie glanced at Dad, then back at me. Fine, she said. We'll be here. They left, the bell over the coffee shop door jingling as it swung shut behind them. I sat back down, heart pounding, hands shaking just a little. A few minutes later, my phone lit up with a notification. A text from my nephew, Mason. Hey Aunt Riley. Mom and Grandpa are freaking out. They said they saw you. I just wanted to say. I didn't think the joke at Thanksgiving was funny. Thought it sucked. Also, I've been using your app with some friends. It's actually brilliant. If you ever have time, could you maybe teach me some stuff about coding? I stared at the word brilliant until my eyes blurred. Someone in this family saw me. Someone who wasn't asking for money, just knowledge. Type back, sure. We can start after I deal with some things this week. And for the first time since Aspen, I felt something other than anger or exhaustion. Felt focused. They wanted to know what had happened to their perfect, stable lives. On Thursday at 7 p.m., in a cramped Denver coffee shop that smelled like burnt espresso and vanilla syrup, I was finally going to show them. Thursday at 7. The coffee shop felt smaller than usual. Maybe it was the walls leaning in to listen. I got there early, took the table in the corner near the back, and watched the door while pretending to rearrange screens on my laptop. Noah sat a few tables away with his own computer, headphones around his neck, pretending to work but obviously on standby. We had talked the night before, gone over every detail, every payment, every contract, making sure we were covered. The bell over the door jingled at 7:02. My parents walked in first, stiff and tense. Then Natalie in her dark blazer, Luke in a gym hoodie, Aaron right behind him. Aunt Brenda was wringing her hands in the back. Mason slipped in last, looking nervous. His eyes finding mine and darting away when his mom glanced at him. They crowded around my table like a jury. For a second no one said anything. Then Mom broke the silence. Riley, she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you for meeting with us. We just want to understand the bank, the bills, your message. Her voice trailed off on the memory of my voicemail. Dad didn't bother with small talk. Did you mess with our accounts or not? I looked at each of them, one by one. The people I had been breaking myself to protect. No, I said. I didn't touch your accounts. I didn't log into your banking. I didn't hack anything. All I did was stop using my money to prop up a life you couldn't afford. Confusion rippled around the table. Natalie frowned. What are you talking about? Your money. You don't have that kind of money. You're always saying you're broke. I say I'm broke, I answered, because after paying my own rent, my own bills, and my own business expenses, I sent almost everything extra to you. I turned my laptop around so they could see the dashboard. LoopNest, my colors, my layout, my name in the corner, and 4 columns labeled with their names. This, I said quietly, is where your emergencies went to be fixed. I clicked a remote, and a big screen on the wall, one I had connected to earlier, lit up with charts and simple slides. Not the dramatic kind, just facts. Revenue graphs. Timeline of user growth. A list of features we'd shipped. A screenshot of a tech article with my name in it. Another with Noah's. A calendar showing late nights and weekend sprints that they used to call wasting my 20s. Then, without raising my voice, I laid out the numbers that hurt. 4 folders on the table, each with a name. Inside are printed summaries of every transfer I have made for you, I said. Dates, amounts, purposes, mortgage top-ups, card payments, lease coverage, late fees I ate so your accounts wouldn't fall apart. Together, I said, it is just over $360,000. My dad flipped open his folder. His hands trembled slightly. My mortgage, he whispered. Every time you thought a miracle payment came through, I said. It wasn't a miracle. It was me. Pointed to Luke. The gym lease. The equipment payments. The time you said you bounced back after the flood. That was my rebound money. I looked at Natalie. Your credit cards. The interest alone would have buried you 2 years ago. I paid down the principal every month so you could keep pretending you were solvent. Aunt Brenda made a small sound, like the wind had been knocked out of her. My mom stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. You sold the company, Natalie whispered, putting the pieces together. You did all this. And you never told us. I felt the pendant of my grandmother's necklace press against my collarbone. It is my company, I said. My work. My risk. I told the people who supported me. Noah. My team. My friends here. The people who didn't roll their eyes every time I said I was building something. You had years to take me seriously, I said. You chose not to. Luke's voice came out sharp and ugly. So what? This is your revenge. Let us drown while you cash out and play the victim online. I met his stare without flinching. This is me stepping out of the way of the consequences you created, I said. You borrowed more than you could pay back. You spent like the money would always magically appear. I was the magic. I turned it off. Mason spoke up then, his voice small but clear. You guys, he said, looking around the table. I've been using her app with my friends. It's brilliant. She did something real. You can't just act like she owes you because you're embarrassed now. Natalie shot him a warning look, but he didn't back down. For a moment nobody knew what to say. The power dynamic had shifted so completely it was almost unrecognizable. My dad sat there, jaw clenched, wordless. My mom's eyes were glossy with guilt and fear. Aunt Brenda looked ashamed. Luke looked furious. Natalie looked calculating. We can fix this, she said slowly. If we restructure the debt. If you help us figure out a plan. Cut her off. I am not here to fix it, I said. I am not here to offer handouts. I am not here to go back to the way things were. I am showing you this so we can finally talk about the same reality. I am done being your invisible safety net. I am done being the joke at your dinner table. If you want help structuring the debt, I will lend you my time. We can do it on paper. With contracts. So I am not your daughter the beggar anymore. I am your lender. And if you ever, I looked at my mom, ever call me a beggar again, I will block your number. Mom winced, but she didn't argue. To my parents, I was softer but sharper at the same time. You need to talk to a counselor, I said. Not because you are bad people, but because for years you measured worth in titles and trophies, and it made you blind. You can stay blind if you want. But you will do it without my money. I stood up. If any of you want to talk again, Really talk, not yell or accuse or treat me like an ATM. We can set up a time. In my office. On my terms. Until then, I said. We are done. I started to walk away. And behind me, I heard my mom's voice break. Riley, please. I touched my necklace and kept walking. 4 years, family meant I was the one who had to bend, to swallow, to pay. Maybe it was time for family to mean something else. Or nothing at all. I walked out into the cold Denver air, breathed it in deep, and felt lighter than I had in my entire life.